Great. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on Leadership Survey Results 2023, Upskilling and Reskilling for the Future, 2023 L&D Trends. Now, my name is Vivek. I'm the Managing Director for Wilson Learning here in India and also the Vice President for Asia Pacific. I've been with Wilson Learning for about 15 years now in various roles. My guests today are David Yesford and Michael Leimbach, two very senior leaders at Wilson Learning. Let me introduce both of them to you before we get started. So David is our Senior VP and Board Member for Wilson Learning, and he's also the MD of APAC. David has over 35 years of experience in developing and implementing performance improvement solutions around the world. David's also a contributing author to several books and white papers, and he's a fairly regular speaker at various learning forums like ATD, Training Magazine, etc. So thank you, David, and welcome to the session. And we also have Dr. Michael Leimbach. Michael is our VP for Global Research and Development. Michael has a long list of accomplishments. I'll go over them quickly if I can. He's also an author of several books and has written over 100 articles and white papers. Michael's also the former editor-in-chief of the research journal Advanced in Development Human Resources. He serves as an editor and a reviewer for 4 other HRD research journals. He's also a member of the ISO, which is the International Standards Organization for Technical Committee on Quality Standards for Learning Services. And he's a distinguished alumni of both Indiana University and University of Minnesota. In addition to all of this, he's also recognized as among the top researchers in the field of L&D around the world. We're happy to have Michael join us and take us through effectively what is his research. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Vivek. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So, some of you may be wondering, what is Wilson Learning? What do we do? So I thought I'd start with a very quick overview, just to give you a sense of who we are and what we do. So Wilson Learning is an award-winning learning services organization with nearly 60 years of experience in providing performance improvement solutions to our customers globally. We're present in over 50 countries. And we have our solutions being offered in over 30 different languages. So we specialize in 3 main areas of sales, leadership, and customer experience. One of the things that I also wanted to highlight, in addition to the background about Wilson Learning, is that this research that you're going to hear the highlights about, we've actually been doing this research for the past 7 years now. And with each passing year, the number of respondents has been growing. So last year, we had sufficient data to generate an India-specific report. And this year, we're actually happy to inform you that the number of respondents has actually tripled from the last year. So the data that we have is much more relevant, and since it's coming from more people, it has more accuracy, I guess, in some ways. And the other important thing to consider is that this data is coming from our market. So we'll obviously get you a copy of both the global consolidated report as well as the India report as a follow-up. But I just wanted to give you a sense of what we've been doing and how we got to where we are today. Just to summarize the flow of the discussion, so today we're going to focus on 5 broad areas. The first is a little bit about the research itself, what's involved, some of those kind of things. We then will talk a little bit about what are the priority skills from this year's research and how it's been evolving over the past few years. We'll also talk a little bit about the shift in learning methods, new methods being adopted, effectiveness of those methods, some of those kind of things. And we'll also look at 2 other areas. The first one is investment in leadership development from several of these organizations, and also some of the best practices from high-performing organizations around leadership development. But before we get into starting to get David and Michael to talk through some of this, I wanted to quickly check in with you and actually ask you to answer this poll question that you see. So the question is, how much has the way you approach leadership development changed over the past 3 years, right? So is it not at all, slightly, significantly, and is it night and day? It's completely different. So thank you. Quite a few responses coming in. Yeah, still have about little less than half who've responded, waiting on the others to respond. So I'll give you another few seconds. If you haven't responded to the poll already that you can see on your screen, I'd request you to please do so now. you. Great, very interesting responses coming in. So far, no one has said not at all, which is sort of expected, and no one's either said night and day either. So it's either slightly or the majority of what we're hearing is significantly. So 75%, well, 72 now with the new response, say significantly, and more of you say that it's slightly changed in the past 3 years. So I think I've got most responses in. I'll give you another maybe 5 seconds to complete this before I close this. All right, let's end this poll. Wonderful. So we've got an interesting split here, about 65% saying significantly and 36% saying slightly. So clearly everyone has, sorry, let me share the results. So you can see it. Clearly everyone's experienced some level of change as far as your leadership development initiatives go. And so I want to thank you for sharing that information with us. And with that said, let's start getting into the nuts and bolts of this conversation. So Michael, let me go to you first. In terms of the research itself, it'll be helpful for our listeners to sort of understand, how do we go about conducting the research? What are some of the things that are involved in this whole process?
Sure, Vivek. Yeah, the research is conducted. Actually, this has been an ongoing process, primarily started in the US 7 years ago. Last year was the first year we surveyed within the APAC region in a significant way, and had a good result. I think if any of you attended our webinar last year, you saw some fascinating results there. This year, the amount of input from the Asia Pacific region tripled in size. So we had a really great turnout for the survey, got some really great data, have a lot of things to share. We even had a sufficient database that we could distribute or contrast organizations that are highly effective in their leadership development to less effective, and show some interesting differences between organizations that are highly effective from those that are slightly less so, or rate themselves as less so. The data we have in the APAC region mirrors the rest of the world in terms of participation. Might want to show that next slide here, that we had about 75% of the people responding were in management positions. So we had a really good input from people who were in a decision-making role within leadership development within their organization. The majority had global presence. So these were organizations in the APAC region that stretched out globally, as well as multinationally. About 30% were APAC only, so a good mix of organizations. And average number of employees was about 17,000, which I think is pretty typical, but a very wide range from very small companies to very, very large companies. So we're really excited that be able to share this data, because we think it's a good representation of the opinions of organizational leaders in leadership development within the Asia Pacific region.
Hey, Michael, Michael, let me just ask a quick follow-up question on this. When we talk about APAC, I know we put the survey out across APAC. Do you have any idea how many were specific to India? I know it's a majority of them were specific to India, but do you have a percentage?
Yeah, we don't. That's one of the things we have not asked respondents, because we want to preserve their anonymity, and we don't.
Right.
We don't want to ask questions that might make them think we're trying to track them as individuals or their individual organization. So we really don't know what percentage. We have a filter that filters out anything that might be spam or robots coming in. But we do know that a majority were from, or a large percentage of them were from India, but it looked like it was across all of APAC in some respects.
Cool. Well, I just wanted, when we're talking about APAC and India, just so that the audience has a perspective, it is a large percentage from India, but it is across APAC. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you for that, Michael. So one of the things that before I go to the next question, I thought I'd let Michael mentioned we similarities in findings between the global report, the US data, and also the APAC data. So as we go along, we will sort of talk to you a little bit more about what were some of those comparisons and where we're seeing similarities and also where we're seeing some differences. So with that said, Michael, I think it puts us into the next sort of questions in terms of what are the major trends, changes, and key highlights that we've seen over the past 7 years?
Interesting, because I think that overall, what we've seen globally is significant changes in how organizations are helping leaders develop. We've seen big increases in involvement of managers and executives in learning and development for leaders, which has had a big impact on the effectiveness of learning and development within organizations. And we've seen a lot more support in organizations for kind of self-guided leadership development. We've seen a trend in organizations moving toward making individual leaders, particularly new leaders, responsible for their own development. Some organizations have not really supported that. Others have really stepped forward and done a lot of activities that really help leaders take that responsibility, and it's had a big impact on organizations. Within APAC, one of the things that, well, globally, but more particularly in APAC, we've seen an emergence of a younger generation of leaders, which I think is very exciting. A lot more millennials are taking leadership positions, and in India, particularly, a lot more than in the rest of the world. And it's fascinating because they come with a commitment and a passion for becoming effective leaders, but many of them lack the critical skills. So we see changes, particularly in Asia, in the APAC region, in the need for change leadership skills, strategic development skills, and skills dealing with people, whether that's diversity or whether that's showing compassion for them. We've also seen greater an adoption of a greater array, a greater type of learning methodologies, technology-driven as well as other forms of learning, and we'll talk about that a little more specifically. So really, it's an exciting time in my, I think, a generational shift in the leaders, but them coming with a different set of skill needs and learning preferences.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's also now for the listeners in the audience here, it's about managing that difference in learning preferences and also the skill requirements at different groups that might be in similar positions as well. Good. All right. So that sort of nicely sets into our next question, Michael, around the key priority skills we talked about. So I'll put that up here. And so could you talk us through what we're seeing here, and also what are some of the similarities and differences from sort of the rest of the world?
Right. This I found this very interesting. This is just the APAC region data from last year, 2022, and this year. And what we do is we ask people to select the 5 top skills that are important to their development over the next coming 12 months. And a couple of things I find fascinating emerge. One is that particularly in APAC, coaching and development was #1 last year. It's #1 this year. Team leadership was #2 last year. It's #2 this year. And that compares very closely to the US sample, as you can see. One of the things that was interesting was change leadership increased the most in terms of importance. It went from 14th last year in terms of priority rank to 7th most important. And we saw significant decreases in skills around influencing others and creating engagement. They dropped from 12 and 13 to 16 and 17. Not as big a drop as an increase in change leadership. So that's one of the things that's really pointing to me is the increased importance of preparing leaders to deal with change that we're seeing this coming year, particularly in the Asia Pacific region. The next graph shows.
Hey, Michael, before you go there, Michael, a couple things, because I was actually talking to Viv about this before you got on this morning. And the change leadership one doesn't surprise me at all. With the requirement to be more resilient, quite frankly, with the younger generation also coming in, change leadership it makes sense to me that has jumped and jump significantly. The thing that's interesting to me is I read a lot about what's going on, not only globally, but also in the Asia Pacific region and India specifically. The creating engagement is one that's really strikes me as a surprise for it going down, given that everybody's talking about engagement. You have the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, all that kind of stuff. Those last two things are in fact addressed by better engagement. Any sense of why the creating engagement, or even any wisdom you could sort of put upon us about why that one has gone down?
Sure, and it is a good question, and something that we're contemplating as well. We don't have direct data on why these things go up and down. A couple things. One, creating engagement, influencing others. They went down, but they didn't go down greatly. I mean, they went from 12th and 13th.
They were already low.
70. They're already pretty low. And when you look at the things at the top, coaching, team leadership, strategy, development, communication skills, these to me all point to some of the basics of a new generation of leaders coming in, that they need to get some of these basic skills in place prior to moving on to more complex things like influencing others within the organization, peers, as well as influencing up, the engagement issue. And so it really shows to me a bit of a focus on the basic skills that new leaders need to really be effective at getting their people to a high level.
That's really insightful. I didn't really think about it as sort of first level managers really need. I'd hate to call them survival skills, but they're really sort of base level skills that I need in order to do my job effectively. Some things like engagement require much more maturity for a leader to do it, to then engage other people. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, very good. Okay, cool. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. And thanks, David. I was going to ask a similar question, but thanks for that. No, that's okay. All right. So, Michael, we've got some more detail here. So I'll put it back to you to sort of take us through this, please.
Great. Yeah, I found this very fascinating. This is looking at the global priorities across the globe. So US results, Latin America, we had significant data, enough for analysis from the US, from Latin America, APAC, obviously, China, and EMEA, and Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And a couple things really kind of came out for me. In the yellowish orange color, those were all the top ranked skills, the number one ranked skills, and a lot of consistency. Coaching development was true for everybody but Latin America, although it was number 2 for Latin America. And change leadership was the most important for Latin America. Go down to the bottom of the screen, a lot of consistency in the less important. Self-development and business acumen were kind of the lower priority skills. A couple of things that came out in APAC are what I often call the outliers, the ones that are rated high compared to the rest of the world. Right. So emotional intelligence and creativity innovation, you could see in the APAC region, were higher than in many of the other organizations or other regions of the world. So it pointed that the APAC region is paying more attention to the emotional intelligence skills that their leaders need, sort of showing that emerging, kind of consistent with that emerging new leader, as well as creativity and innovation as being more critical to APAC leadership development than in some of the other regions. So I found that very intriguing. One, the great consistency, as well as some of the differences between regions of the world on skill development. In essence, they're saying, for the top 2 or 3 skills, the world needs leaders that can coach, can develop strategy, can deal with change, and can communicate effectively with people.
Thanks, Michael. And I think that's also sort of ties into what we just talked about around diversity in the new generation coming into leaders. So the need for emotional intelligence across both, with leaders coming in and needing to manage in APAC what would generally be a fairly diverse group of individuals from many generations, and especially in India, I think culturally as well, there's lots of different customs and things that we have to deal with. We often think about it as, yes, we know it all, but then when it comes to combining that with sort of the business day to day, I can see why that's coming up on a priority list. And my conversations with customers have also sort of led to similar requests around emotional intelligence being one of the top things that they're focusing. So thank you for that insight.
You're welcome. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I find is that, you know, several years ago, we realized that skill development is important, but also is character development,
right? Yeah.
Within organizations. And so we also had an opportunity to have them rank order elements of character. And I found that very interesting as well. And I think that's on the next slide. If you can share that. Is this is again APAC specific results. And the blue shows this year's, the kind of orangish yellow shows last year. And so what we saw is an increase in ethics, integrity, and trust are at the top. That's true worldwide. Showed a slight decline because we saw some significant increases in the value of empowerment and in resilience at the bottom, even though it was very low you know, at the lower end, both in 2022 and 2023. So we really saw some opportunities to, you know, that things like nurturing growth, promoting diversity, curiosity, and creativity seem to increase in terms of their value within the APAC region compared to last year. But again, trust, integrity, nurturing others, empowering others were high levels of importance to organizations. And I think, you know, we mentioned how the we've seen growth in the number of people from different generations.
Right. Yeah.
And again, this is the APAC region. One of the things I found interesting is that APAC had the largest group of millennials that took on leadership positions. And you can see this is what people said were that where their current leaders are, what percentage of their current leaders are from different generations. And what you've seen around the world, but particularly in the APAC region, is that the Generation X and millennials are really dominating leadership positions within organizations. Millennials more in APAC, Generation X more in US and EMEA. And, you know, significant number of people from the Gen Z, the youngest generation, you know, 23% of the leaders are from the Gen Z, the new next.
That's interesting as well to see is a big group of 23% is a pretty significant chunk.
That's a big number.
Yeah.
That is a big number. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. So, Michael, thank you for that. And David, any inputs from you on priority skills? Anything interesting that you sort of picked up?
You know, the main thing for me in terms of the interesting piece about it is, again, with all the focus on leadership, a lot of the world thinks about leadership more on the advanced leadership kinds of skills, like again, we talked about in the previous slide around engagement and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things we always talk about is, you know, that as you look at the different levels of leadership, there's different focuses. Early leaders do require more skill development. Later leaders, so ones that have been in the leadership position over time, need to develop character more. They need to do, you know, focus on those because the expectation is that they already have some of those skills. And that's really why I think you're seeing a lot of the differences. This particular graph shows a lot of the differences in the last two slides we looked at around skills and character. And it's really fascinating to look at it because it does provide a huge challenge to organizations when they have the new leaders in there, in terms of how to develop them, and even the mindset that the Gen Z and millennials come into around what leadership is different, and you need to adjust it. So a lot of traditional L&D development methodologies are probably going to change, and I think that's what it is that Michael's going to set us up on.
Yeah, and before we get to that, just to address the audience, I know many of you represent, as we talked about in the data, many of you represent global organizations, and I know that there's often conversations that happen, you know, between sort of priorities when you set up leadership development priorities across the world for the entire organization versus regionally. So just want to point that out, that in addition to the data that you're seeing now, while this is a high-level overview, we'll also be sort of sending you the other more detailed report, which you can sort of look at, and maybe that can help influence your planning or discussions that you have internally with when you're discussing, requirements for your organization based on the different regions that you're present in.
Yeah, good.
So with that, what I
Hey,
thought,
Viv,
sorry.
just
David, go ahead.
one thing to go out to the audience with real quickly too is
Yeah.
please let us know if you have any questions. Put it in the question pod or the
Yeah,
chat
thank you.
pod.
Sure.
Michael and I, along with Viv, do these a lot, and those kind of interactions in terms of questions, we can often weave into the into what it is that we do. So we love to hear reactions, questions, that kind of stuff. Please feel free to put those in there. Viv, I'm passing to you. I'll get back again.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks for the reminder. And yes, like David said, please feel free to answer. I think I've opened the Q&A pod, so any questions you've got, put it in there, and any comments or inputs you want to share, please put it in the chat window. Thank you. Right. So now that we've taken a look at sort of, the priority skills, what are people prioritizing in terms of skills for leadership development? Michael, I want to go back to you and ask you questions around how are these being implemented in terms of what are we seeing as far as approaches to learning and development of leadership development, and what are some of the changes in which we're seeing as far as preferences of learning from different folks, especially given that we've just talked about some of the generational differences that exist?
Sure. That's an interesting part of the survey. What we do is we have a list of about 25 different learning methods used in leadership development. And we ask people two questions around that. One, do they use that method? And second, if they use it, how effective do they think it is? And so this graph really shows usage of skills, of learning methodologies within APAC. These are the percentage of people who say, yes, I use these methodologies in our learning. And we're finding some interesting changes. These are the 7 learning methods that increase the most as a result of comparing last year in the kind of goldish color to this year in the blue color. And so what we see is a big increase, even though it's start out fairly small, only about 75% of the people use that. A big increase in the number of people using virtual reality, augmented reality, or artificial intelligence in their leadership development, which is a big jump. It's been used a lot in technical training, not as much in leadership development. We're starting to see that emerge, but also increases in the use of executive education programs, challenge assignments, putting people into difficult situations and seeing how they do. Big increase in something that's already used a lot. Over 95% of the people use simulations and role plays. Problem-based, some call action learning assignments, giving them a problem, having them solve it. Micro-learning has grown a lot, as well as increases in instructor-led. Now the increase in instructor-led could be an artifact of now we're out of the pandemic, people are coming back to the classroom. But it really shows, I think, a fascinating combination of both technology-based learning, as well as some of, like in virtual reality, micro-learning, and some of the more, what people might call more traditional learn by doing methodologies, stress exercises, role plays, problem-based learning. So very exciting combination of both technology and non-technology based learning as growing, particularly within the APAC region. And this is reflected in other regions of the world as well. And then you contrast that with the effect, how people rate the effectiveness, and you find some interesting combinations. What this shows, again, we asked them to rate each learning method in terms of how effective. These are the percentage of people said it was effective or highly effective. And again, in this case, the gold is this year and the blue is last year. And again, some significant increases in use of simulations, use of learning portals, small increase in instructor-led training, and some decreases, in video-based learning, decreases in virtual instructor-led, again, kind of paralleling the classroom-based, and decreases in informal learning. That was one that for several years in the US at least had grown significantly, and now we're seeing people go back saying, the informal learning, important part, but it's not as critical as effective as we thought it might have been. So
it is interesting.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Vivek.
Sorry. I was just saying it's interesting to look at this because when it comes to adopting new methods, we've seen people have been moving fairly quickly into that. But this acts as a sort of a reflection moment, if you will, to say, okay, what is actually more effective when we really step back and think about it? And we're starting, even last year when we did this, we saw a significant contrast in terms of what is being used versus what is being perceived as effective.
You know, it is fascinating how what we see over the years is that a lot of times, one is that we're seeing an expansion of the types of learning methodologies. So it's not that people are saying, okay, we're going to stop doing this and start doing this. It's like we add that to the portfolio, which I think is really good for meeting all learners where they are. At the same time, we see, you know, a small group of learning methodologies that seem to be adopted more because of their appearance of being new and innovative, that when they first adopt them, they realize are not as effective. We often, in doing the analysis, we often refer to those as the shiny new things. It's like, you know, let's try this shiny new toy. Let's try artificial intelligence. And then you later find out, well, maybe it's not as effective as we thought it was going to be. Or that it's just in its infancy and needs to grow into it.
Needs to grow into something else,
See, that to me seems more like what it is, because again, I'm talking about sort of the younger generation coming in. They're going to want to try some of those things. We may not have figured out how best to utilize it. So it's still in its infancy. So there's more growth to be there. So there's the potential of it goes away because it's not effective, or there's a potential for it to grow in effectiveness.
Yeah, right. Yeah, very much true. Very much so.
We do have one question before we continue. Durga Prasad's asking, I would like to know the challenges on accountability perceptions. Durga, if you can sort of type in the chat window and explain that question a little bit, we can probably come back to that. When we talk about accountability perceptions, are you talking about leaders taking their accountability for their learning? Are you talking about just if you could just clarify what you mean, we might be able to get a more specific answer. So I'll wait for your input before we come back to this question. In the meantime, let's sort of continue with the data. Michael, we talked a little bit about some of the, and David, I want to invite you in here as well for both of you to sort of talk through this. We're starting to see a number of different working models that companies are adopting. Some of them are 100% back to work, back to the office. Some are hybrid. Some are large part of their organization is remote. The question really that I have is, what has been the impact on the skills as well as the learning methods in terms of we're seeing because of this flexibility that we see in environments? So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. There's another area that I find fascinating. I find a lot of things fascinating in this research. I guess that's why I do it. But a lot of people point to the idea that the pandemic accelerated some changes that were starting to occur already, and we were already seeing people moving toward more of a hybrid, and organizations moving more to a hybrid work environment. You see, particularly in technology companies, a lot of people are able to work remotely. And this shows the results from last year, 2022, in the gold and blue this year for the APAC region. And maybe we go back to the first slide. The APAC region, last year had over half of the people were remote, very few hybrid, about 30% at work site. We saw a big shift so that now the dominant methods are hybrid and 100% work site, with the percentage of people remote dropping significantly with APAC. And that was somewhat mirrored in the rest of the world. And we can see, go back to that other slide, that one of the things I found fascinating is you look at the APAC data, which is that dark green bar, really is kind of leading the world in terms of the hybrid model of learning. They top the list with 40% of the people working in the hybrid. China dominates the move back to the work site. a lot. The rest of the companies, or the rest of the regions are about in the middle, but it really shows the grasp of the hybrid model that is taking over the world for many regions, many organizations. And I think it's, again, I think we were moving that direction before the pandemic. Pandemic accelerated it, and it's starting to really take hold as organizations realizing that they can be as efficient, if not more efficient, when you have people coming in remotely into the workforce, or combining work site and remote work environments. And this is really, I think, pointing to the fact that we've now had enough experience that people are saying, hey, this is a highly effective work environment. And that graph kind of shows that, is that the majority of people or respondents, in this case, the managers of learning and development, say that hybrid work environments are highly effective. 60% of organizations are saying that this is either moderately or greatly positive impact on organizational effectiveness. Very few say that it's got a great negative impact, on less than 10%. And almost none, only about 8%, say it has no impact. So it's clearly having an impact on effectiveness. The majority of people say it's a positive impact, which I think is a real nice move. When we first, during the first part of the pandemic in 2020, actually the 2021 survey was the first one, because we did the survey in February. Everybody moved home in March and April of that year. So, but it was, the majority of people said hybrid work is having a negative impact on effectiveness. And now it's come to the point where we're saying, no, it's having a positive impact.
Yeah, I was just going to comment saying that that's a change in perspective, if there was one, right? So it's it's within a couple of years, it's gone moving from very negative to quite a bit positive. So that's really interesting. All right, very good. So now let's move into, so now that we've seen sort of the trends and also what's the impact of skills and how people are learning, and also around how they're learning based on how they're working, which is either remotely or in the office, and so on and so forth. Now let's talk a little bit about the investment side of things, which I think a lot of our audience is really going to be interested in terms of what are we seeing as far as trends in terms of investments in leadership development, and also maybe again a little bit of comparison to the rest of the world as well. So Michael, I'll pass this on to you for the data.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things we do in the survey is we ask people how much they spend on training and development in total. So not necessarily just leadership development, but on training totally. And we also get from them the size of their organization, the number of people. And that way we're able to kind of compare an apple to an apple. We analyze it in terms of the total training spend per employee, not per manager, but per employee overall. And what we see is that APAC is right at that average of about $140 per person. US is a bit higher at about 180. China is quite a bit lower at $80 per person. And this is all put in US dollars to, again, allow for comparisons. But APAC's right in the middle, in terms of how much they spend per employee. Now this is down a little bit from last year, which I think we show in the next slide. Within APAC, it was about $170 per person. It's now about $140. Don't know how much of this is a trend, or whether this is one of the things we do find from the US data, because we have a 7-year history there, is that it tends to alternate. It goes down one year and then up the next year. I think in part because people see some holes opening up, so they invest a lot, and then they say, we're not getting as much value out of that, so let's bring it back down, and we go back and forth. So I think we'll see it pop up again next year within APAC. Because
and also I think, sorry, Michael, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead, please.
I was just saying it also potentially because we've long talked about learning needing to be a journey, not so much in terms of an event-based kind of thing. I'm not sure if this is a right interpretation, but it also that leadership interventions are spreading more over time. So what I might have chosen to spend in 1 year, I may not need to deal with it the immediate next year. I may have to deal with it third year as well. So, that
true,
could be
yeah.
one of the things that might be contributing as
Yeah.
well.
Hey,
And also just
Thank-
want to clarify to the audience that you may see the per employee kind of spend vary from study to study. So just to clarify, how we do it is we ask their total expenses in training and development overall, and what is the size of the organization. So this is not specific to leadership development or any particular band of employees or a group of employees. This is across the entire organization. So, so I just wanted to clarify that to make sure that everyone understands that while you may see different numbers, the way that we ask the question is much more, what are you totally spending, and therefore what are you spending per
Macro.
employee? Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, like there's a study by a couple other organizations that look at spending per employee trained. And so that
Right.
number is going to be a lot higher because you're segregating the population that gets training and then showing how much they're trained. Whereas we again, one's not right or wrong. It's just a different way of looking at the data and the values and the trend. And in fact, you make a good point in terms of, there's total training and then specifically what happens within leadership development.
Right.
And what we're really seeing in the APAC region is an increase in the percentage of the total spend going toward leadership development. So this is the number of the percentage of respondents who say that they spend between 0 to 100% of their training budget on leadership development, and comparing 2022 to 2023. And you can see in the APAC region, big increase in the percentage that spend between 30 and 40%. Another big increase in the percent that say they spend between 40 and 100% of their training budget on leadership development, with decreases on the lower end. So, again, while maybe overall training spend might be down a little bit, the percentage going to leadership development has remained high, which spells well. And this is, compares to when you compare it across the globe, APAC is probably in the best position in terms of the highest percentage of respondents indicating spending at that 40 to 100% of their budget compared to the other countries, whereas EMEA at a little lower end. And the others, again, comparable, the largest groups of people in the US and China and APAC are spending it on at the 40% or higher level, with APAC leading that, whereas Latin America, most of the largest groups are spending between the 20 and 30% of their budget on leadership development. So I think some really good indications that leadership development is a priority for a lot of organizations today.
Yeah, and I think also the US market and largely APAC market as well have a lot of services business. I would imagine as part of that, there might be more leaders, new leaders coming in, so that might sort of be also increasing the overall percentage of spend into.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Michael, around that. So finally, the last sort of data point that we want to talk about is around what are some of the best practices or even tips from high-performing organizations, both in APAC and outside, to sort of increase the effectiveness of leadership development that we've seen. So, before we go there, we do have some information on future investment around what does it look like over the next 12 months?
Right. Yeah. We also ask people, that what they anticipate spending in the next 12 months, looking forward. And this doesn't always mirror what actually happens, but it's a good indication of the optimism people have. And again, in both last year and this year, some strong optimism. 60% of the people saying that they're going to spend more. Only about 10 to 15% saying they're going to spend less. And this is higher than we were able to compare it to the US sample, where about 25% of the people are anticipating spending less. Only about 40% anticipate spending more. So a lot more, I think, more optimism in the APAC region compared to the United States region around future spending on leadership development.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So let's go over to the best practices and see what are some of the things that we found as far as best practices from high-performing organizations go. So, David, Michael,
Great.
back to you in terms of this.
Okay, great. And I want to go through this fairly quickly, make sure we leave time for people to answer questions. Again, please put your questions. We love answering questions here. But this shows how people view the impact of leadership development on both performance and employee engagement. And again, it's a percentage of people saying it's not effective, somewhat effective, or highly effective. And again, the results are showing that for most organizations in the APAC region, above 30% of those are saying it's somewhat effective. 40% are saying it's highly effective. That engagement leads a little bit at the highest effective area. So it's suggesting that it's having a slightly bigger impact on employee engagement than on organizational performance, but both are extremely high. When you have 70, 80% of organizations saying leadership development is having a positive impact on organizational performance as well as employee engagement, very positive outcome. In fact, we can look at that a little more specifically on the next slide, shows some of the outcomes that people are saying. Again, this is comparing last year to this year. But if you look at the last one, the bottom row, biggest impact has been on having sufficient bench strength. Huge improvement from about 65 to nearly 80% of organizations are saying that the number of people they have ready to take on leadership positions, what we call their bench strength, has increased significantly. And we've seen smaller increases in the resources toward leadership development, their ability to attract high potential leaders, which is kind of very closely related to bench strength. So they're able to attract leaders from other organizations because of their leadership development. Slight increases in skill gaps within the group, slight decreases in believing they have the best in class. All again, very high. 75% of organizations say that their leaders are the best leaders in their industry. So some real positive outcomes related to specific impacts of leadership development, which is one of the things we really like to pay a lot of attention to. These areas that it's not just generally impact on performance, but it's specific actions that increase organizational performance, like having good bench strength, having best-in-class leaders within the organization.
And Michael, the interesting thing about this is you read a lot of the trending information that's coming out about 2023 and 2024. Issues around bench strength, having enough resources to develop leaders are critical issues that people are looking at. So this chart shows a really positive view of those upcoming challenges, and that Asia Pacific is in a good position for that.
Exactly. And in fact, one of the things that this allows us to do by measuring these outcomes of leadership development, we can, obviously, this shows the percentage that say it's highly effective, but there are some organizations that are less effective, some in the middle, some high. And so we were able to classify organizations based upon that difference and compare them in terms of what are the things they're doing versus not doing that lower performing organizations don't do. So here's a great example. We talked a lot about the emergence of the younger generation of leaders and the impact they can have on an organization. This shows high performing organizations differ from lower performing organizations on two critical areas. One is that they are really catering their learning and development efforts toward the younger generation. That they, nearly 100% of them say that they choose learning methods that the next generation of leaders value, that they see these new leaders having commitment and passion and having reasonable expectations, compared to only about 60 to 70% of lower performing organizations. And then balancing that is they have current leaders that are willing to let go of responsibility and willing to provide coaching and support, compared to lower performing organizations not providing that as effectively. So they're much more positioned to leverage the existing talents and knowledge of current leaders to support the development of the next generation of leaders within their organization. So showing that that they are well positioned, that they're doing the things they need to do to be able to
Great.
drive future performance with the next generation of leaders.
Great. So thanks for that, Michael. The question that we had earlier, we've got a little bit more clarity. So I'll talk about it. The original question was, would like to know the challenges on accountability perceptions. And so we got a response saying sometimes there's a confusion between responsibility and accountability. So I guess the question really is around either leaders taking responsibility for their learning, or are they being held accountable for their learning? That could be one sort of angle that we might want to take a look at. Yeah.
Well, and in fact, they're very closely tied. Is that the the more an organization, in fact, I think some of the data from on the next slide kind of demonstrates some of this, is that the more organizations hold their leaders accountable, the more likely they are to take greater responsibility. And so this shows, again, comparing high performing organizations to lower performing organizations. One of the key differences is that higher performing organizations have key performance indicators, KPIs, for development for their new leaders. Big difference, significant difference between higher performing organizations and lower performing organizations in terms of the percentage. They're also more likely to provide different kinds of assessment of skills, either a self-assessment of skills or a 360 feedback tool to help new leaders select and guide their choices in terms of what they develop, as well as provide them with stretch exercises for taking responsibility. Because again, as we said earlier, organizations are expecting leaders to take responsibility for their own development, but those leaders need the support from their organizations to be able to do that effectively. And it's showing that effective organizations are in fact doing those things much more frequently than our lower performing organizations.
Thanks, Michael. And in fact, I think just going back to what even we talk about in sort of the HPI model is around much more around the systemic, feedback loop that sort of brings in from the skill point to back into the system in terms of how the system talks about it. And I think you also might have some points around best practices going further around support for leadership development coming in to hold those leaders accountable.
Sure, exactly. One of the biggest differences are in terms of the kinds of things the organizations do to support the development of leaders. 100% of the organizations that were seen as highly effective, take steps to leverage the current leaders' effectiveness, compared to only about less than 60% of low performing organizations. Large majority of high performing organizations, work to capture knowledge. The executives prioritize learning and development and have a clear focus on that, as well as adopt learning methodologies that match the expectations of the next generation of leaders. A huge gap between low performing organizations. And put efforts, particularly high and moderate, put a lot more efforts to recruiting candidates into leadership positions and making those effective. But I think, to me, one of the keys is around matching developmental approaches expectations. The younger generations expect learning in different forms. They're not tied to that, come to a class for 2 or 3 days, take the class and then leave. They understand the need to embed learning in the work environment, the need to support the application of that learning over time, the use of different methodologies to reach them in different ways. And so we see a lot of promise in terms of high performing ACEs providing those.
Thank you, Michael. So we do have another question, but before we do that, I thought we could sort of talk through some of the additional information that there might be around best practices before we get into the question.
Very much so. And one of the key findings we find across the globe is that the more executives are involved in learning and development, the more effective that learning and development for leaders is. The more you can, have executives participate, kick off sessions, record, videos or audios that talk to the value of learning and development for their leaders. And to a large extent, probably one of the most critical ones is modeling that leadership philosophy and behaviors they're looking for. If you don't have leaders modeling those behaviors, you don't have an effective learning of those new behaviors and practicing of those new behaviors within organizations. So important, I will often tell organizations, if there's one thing you do differently, it's get the executives involved in leadership development, because if you're not doing that, you're not getting the results you expect.
And Michael, that actually goes to the question that we've got, which is, how do we ensure visibility of ROI for L&D? And I think I'm going to sort of offer a perspective about that, but I think it gives you a chance to reinforce kind of what you just said. But I think it is about leaders, executives being involved in that, not just being involved because they're informed of the leadership development activities you're doing, but that there's a clear and direct connection between what leadership development does to drive the organization's strategy. That's an executive conversation. And so instead of ROI numbers, what you're looking for, you're looking much more for the impact that leaders have. And that chart that you had a couple of slides ago, where you're talking about the impact on performance and on fulfillment of the organization, engagement within the organization, are critical ways by which to articulate that. But if you're an L&D leader, the important thing is involve the executives at a business level to talk about why leadership development is good for the business and driving results.
Exactly. I think the more you can get executive leadership articulating those concerns, articulating the value of growing the organization through its leadership effectiveness, the more you're going to get results.
And Michael, there was a research study that you did a couple years ago for L&D that I always sort of think about when we talk about this. And it's really the question that you as an L&D professional needs to ask of your organization. How much is leadership, or are the executives talking about leadership, people development, leadership development? How much are they funding it in the budget, looking at sort of annual reports even? Is it in the MD&A? Are they talking about it? That kind of thing. That's another thing that you can do to ensure that the executives are connected, that they're visibly and vocally demonstrating a support of the leadership development.
Very much so. What the results suggest is that the more executives publicly acknowledge that leadership is a source of competitive advantage for their organization, the more likely you're going to have high-performing organizations.
And that's L&D's role, to help get those messages to the executives.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Not unrealistic ROI numbers, really impact conversations and why it's sort of a competitive advantage. Perfect.
Very much. Yeah. Specific outcomes that they're seeing moving forward.
So we'll sort of quickly summarize our best practices around this. We've touched on a couple of things around executive involvement, things like that. Michael, I'll let you go through that. Yeah.
Sure. These are some of the things that obviously when you do research, people want to say, well, yeah, but what does that mean for me? What does it suggest I need to do? And so we came up with these 5 key points. Again, you don't need to necessarily tackle all of them all at once, but one is, making sure that your investment in leadership development remains consistent and is kind of right size for your organization. Not these big swings in terms of we're spending a lot of money now we're not spending any money, now we're spending a lot of money. It's just, look at in terms of creating that consistency. Character development. We find time and time again that leadership character plays a critical role in retention of people. In addition to the skills, that choosing the right methodology. We've talked a lot about the next generation of leaders coming in, and it's really about choosing methodologies that work for them and for your organization, and providing guidance to new leaders in terms of their developmental choices. They want to take responsibility, they have the passion and commitment, but they need help in choosing those. And as we've just finished talking about, involve executives in leadership development, making sure that they're visible in the leadership development, and they're talking about the importance of leadership for their organizations. And this is one of my favorite quotes, because it really speaks to the idea of this change in how we think about leadership development. That is not a it's not a matter of going off for a week to a boot camp and learning leadership skills and coming back to the organization. So about embedding learning for leadership in the organization and leveraging technologies, not just for the sake of the technology, but to enhance the traditional methods and integrate those into the workforce and realign how we measure the outcomes of learning and development for leaders differently than we had more traditionally with traditional methodologies in moving forward. And so it speaks well to, I think, many of these changes that we're seeing and the real promise of leadership development for organizations to increase effectiveness.
And Michael, just to sort of take what you just said and go back to, I think it's Gargi is how to say that name. I apologize if I've killed that team, but what if executive involvement is not consistent in just a tick mark activity? That means you have a journey to go on with your leaders, with your executives. Ultimately, what it also indicates is that maybe L&D has talked much more about the skills they could develop and the methods that they talk about, but not necessarily the business impact. You've got to get a business impact conversation because that's the only language that executives are going to understand and the only way by which you're going to move from a tick mark to an actual they're supporting the process overall.
Thanks for that, David. And in fact, David and I have done several sessions on L&D as a strategic source of advantage to the organizations, and we'll be happy to share that recording or even some information with you on that. Thank you for the question. Also, we have a couple more questions as we go along. So, are there different levels based on experience level of employee? I'm Selvaraj, I'm not sure. What exactly?
Yeah. We mean different levels. That's the
yeah. We do need different levels at the based on experience. We can't provide uniform inputs to all employees regardless of their level of experience.
Yeah, I think
that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about skill sets, it's kind of David kind of talked about the idea of when you have new leaders coming in, less experience, they need some of those survival skills first. They need some of those basic skills of how do I motivate people? How do I recognize and coach them? And so, I think we, as a industry, we moved to that, the more strategic level skills, and we're not as good at recognizing that we've got this younger generation of new leaders coming in that maybe need some of those more basic skills.
That's a big deal. That's what from what the generational data is saying, that's a big deal in the Asia Pacific regions, India specifically.
Yeah, thanks, Selvaraj. We do have one more question. I think it's an interesting one. Is around skill versus character. I don't know if it needs to be versus. It's got to be both. We often talk about effective leadership being as a sort of a balance between what we call essence and form. And when we talk about form, we're really talking about the skills. And when we're talking about essence, we're really talking about the character. So you are right, Ajay, in that most development are focused on skill-based because I guess they tend to be a little bit more tangible in terms of the way you can describe it, in terms of what you're looking at. At the same time, one of the things that, especially as you go higher in the leadership hierarchy, character essence becomes significantly more important. So if you're looking to develop, senior leadership, you might want to start looking at, well, yes, the skill, but also what sort of character elements do we want our leaders to sort of demonstrate, and have a conversation with your executives about what does the culture of leadership look like in this organization, and then sort of work your way from that. And Michael, David, I'll invite you to add a little bit more as well.
No, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, and it is one of those things that I think organizations tend to view leadership character as something you teach to your executives or your more experienced managers. And we find that, within these results that character is important from the very first day you step into the role of leader. The kind of character development you need is different in terms of you really need to get them to think about themselves as developing their credibility around leadership, but character is critical at every stage of development for leaders, both new leaders as well as existing leaders.
Excellent. All right. So I see that we've addressed most of the questions. We're up on time. We're 5 minutes over. thank you so much, everyone, for your patience. Michael and David, those of you who are here, it's ridiculously early for these two in the US. I think it's earlier than 6 o'clock for David, and it's probably not even 5 o'clock for Michael. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights from the research with this. We look forward to doing it again next year. And as for the attendees, well, thank you so much for your participation and your contribution to the session. We will follow up with some information for you around the research itself in more detail. The global report is still being prepared, so we will follow that up with another input around the global study as well. So again, you'll get the APAC report first, and then you'll get the global report later as we go along. So, and please do reach out to us for any questions or anything that you might have, through email or catch us on LinkedIn. You can also sign up for our newsletters and keep up to date with regular information. And thank you for all the thank yous that are coming in. With that said, David, Michael, and I will be here for a few more minutes. So that if anybody wants to stay back and sort of talk a little bit, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending the session. Loved having all of you. Have a great rest of your day and a good weekend. Thank you.